The hazmat team was pulling dead fish out of the lake, while HOA Karen screamed at me across the police tape. "This is your fault!" she shrieked. Freeze frame. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up getting sued for poisoning an entire lake. The same lake the HOA poisoned themselves to stop me from fishing. Spoiler alert, they didn't know their entire water supply depended on it. When I first moved into Willow Lake Estates, I thought I had found paradise carved out of the chaos of the world. My backyard sloped gently down to the water's edge, a mirror-like lake that caught every color of the sky. The realtor had pointed at it proudly, telling me it was stocked with bass and catfish, and that I would have full fishing rights as part of my deed. That was all I needed to hear. Fishing was more than a hobby to me. It was therapy, it was meditation, it was what kept me grounded after years working a desk job that ate pieces of my soul, one shift at a time. I could already see myself casting a line at sunset, the cicadas buzzing, a cold beer sweating in the grass next to me. The first few weeks were everything I had imagined. I set up a modest wooden dock and spent hours out there, sometimes with a rod, sometimes just listening to the water slap gently against the shore. My neighbors waved politely, but kept to themselves. It was idyllic. Too idyllic, in fact, looking back on it. Because nothing stays perfect forever, especially not when a homeowners association is lurking beneath the surface, like a snapping turtle waiting to bite. The first odd thing I noticed was the wildlife protection memo tucked into my mailbox one morning. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with a cartoon heron in the top left corner, looking disapprovingly at a stick figure fishing. The memo sternly reminded residents that disturbing aquatic ecosystems could result in fines or loss of community privileges. I thought it was a general notice, probably aimed at kids throwing rocks at ducks or someone feeding geese, and ignored it. After all, my property line extended right to the water, and my deed explicitly granted me lake access rights. If I wanted to fish on my own backyard, I had every legal right to do so. A few days later, a new sign appeared near the boat ramp on the far side of the lake. Quiet zone. No recreational disturbances. It seemed ridiculous, but again, I figured it was not directed at me. Maybe some teenagers had been partying there. Maybe it was about jet skis, which I had not seen any of. But who knew? I had no reason to suspect that the noose was already tightening around me. The first direct confrontation came on a golden Saturday evening. I was standing on my dock, casting into the warm shallows, when I heard someone clearing their throat loudly behind me. I turned to find a woman about my mother's age standing at the edge of my property, arms crossed, mouth pinched like she had just bitten into a lemon. She wore a pastel pantsuit that screamed HOA president, and she clutched a manila folder like it contained nuclear codes. "Excuse me," she barked, taking a pointed step onto my grass without invitation. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" I reeled in my line, trying to keep my face neutral. "Fishing," I said simply. Her lips tightened. "That is in direct violation of Willow Lake Estates Environmental Covenant 4.2b, she snapped, flipping open the folder with the flourish of a magician revealing a rabbit. "Disturbance of wildlife habitats through recreational activity is strictly prohibited." I blinked at her. "Ma'am," I said, struggling to keep my voice polite, "my deed specifically grants me access to the lake for fishing. That was confirmed when I bought the property." She sniffed, flipping another page dramatically. "The covenant supersedes individual deeds where community resources are concerned," she said, clearly reciting something she had memorized for this very moment. "I am Karen Holloway, president of the Willow Lake HOA, and it is my duty to maintain the environmental integrity of our neighborhood." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I kept my tone level. "Then maybe you should check Section 5, Paragraph 3 of the founding charter," I said, because I had done my homework after getting the memo. The lake is a private resource, but lakeside property owners retain riparian rights to reasonable recreational use, including fishing. Karen's mouth opened, then closed like a fish on dry land. She clearly had not expected pushback, especially not well-informed pushback. "We'll see about that," she said finally, turning sharply on her heel and storming off. I watched her go, knowing in my gut that this was not over. Over the next week, the letters started arriving. First came the notice of violation, citing unpermitted use of lake resources, complete with a $150 fine. Then, a community noise complaint, alleging that my recreational activity was causing disturbances during quiet hours, even though the only sounds were the splash of my lure and the occasional chirp of a frog. Then a warning about unauthorized structures, referring to my small wooden dock, even though it had been approved by the county when the property was developed decades ago. Each letter came certified mail, each thicker than the last, each written in the kind of aggressive faux legalese that screamed amateur hour. I refused to be intimidated. I carefully filed each document, photographed each envelope, and recorded every interaction I had with Karen or her cronies. I invested in a security camera system, not because I thought they would vandalize anything, but because I wanted airtight evidence when, not if, this situation exploded. Karen's tactics grew increasingly petty. She sent HOA inspectors to my property, clipboard, wielding retirees who lurked at the edge of my yard taking photos of my dock and pretending to measure noise levels with cheap decibel apps on their phones. I caught one of them hiding behind my neighbor's hydrangeas, aiming a long lens at my backyard like he was on safari. I waved at him cheerfully, snapped a photo of my own, and added it to my growing file. Anonymous complaints about trash accumulation, an empty tackle box, and unsightly lawn maintenance, a patch of wildflowers I had planted deliberately, followed. When none of that worked, they started posting community bulletin notices, implying that anyone engaging in unauthorized fishing could be subject to legal action or forced removal of personal property. It would have been laughable if it were not so. Infuriating. I stayed calm. I stayed polite. But inside, the tension coiled tighter every day. I had seen this game before. HOAs like Karen's did not want compliance. They wanted control. They wanted absolute submission, the kind where you never so much as breathed wrong without clearing it through a committee. And if they could not get it through bullying, they would get it through escalation. I knew it. I felt it in my bones. Something dirtier was brewing under the surface. Something worse than violation notices and fines. And sure enough, it would not be long before the lake itself became the next battleground, and the stakes would rise far higher than I ever could have imagined. For now, though, I kept fishing. I kept casting my line into that deep blue water, every ripple a quiet act of defiance. I knew the lake better than they ever would. I knew its moods, its rhythms, its life. They could write all the memos they wanted, but they could not change the truth, that this place was alive, and that life could not be controlled by clipboards and committee votes. The real question was how far Karen would go to try. I was about to find out, and so were they. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that made you forget trouble even existed. The sun was rising over the lake, painting the water in soft golds and pinks, and I stepped onto my porch with a steaming mug of coffee, ready to start the day the way I always did, watching the world come to life. Except today, something was wrong. The air smelled off, sharp and chemical, like the stench of a garden center left out in the sun too long. I frowned and walked down toward the dock, my boots squishing wetly against the dew-soaked grass. The closer I got to the water, the stronger the smell became, until it filled my nose and coated my tongue in something bitter. That was when I saw them. The fish, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Floating belly up in the shallows, their silver sides flashing sickly under the morning sun. Some were small minnows, others were fat old catfish I had recognized from my evening casts, their gaping mouths frozen mid-silent scream. I stood there, stunned, unable to move, unable to breathe. The lake, my lake, was dead. It took a few minutes before my brain kicked back into gear. I pulled out my phone, snapping photo after photo, then dialed the non-emergency line for the local environmental office. By noon, a team in khaki vests and waders had roped off a section of shoreline, carefully collecting samples. I watched from my porch, arms crossed, heart hammering in my chest. A few curious neighbors gathered too, murmuring among themselves. Karen was there, of course, arriving in her pristine white SUV, her face set in a mask of righteous fury. She marched straight over to the lead inspector, a stout man named Craig, and began pointing animatedly at my property. I could not hear every word, but I caught enough to know she was throwing me under the bus. "He is the one always fishing," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Dragging God knows what into the water. Chemicals from his bait, pollution from his equipment. It is no wonder this happened." Craig gave her a tight smile and said something I could not catch, but Karen turned and shot me a look so venomous it could have wilted the grass. I just smiled thinly and sipped my coffee. Let her talk. The truth had a funny way of coming to light, just like oil floating to the top of a pond. The next day, a letter appeared taped to my door, an official notice of pending action, accusing me of contributing to environmental contamination, and warning that the HOA would seek damages if I did not cease unauthorized activities immediately. It was laughable. I had not even been fishing that week, but Karen's plan was clear: create a scapegoat, create a villain, and steer the blame anywhere but where it belonged. What she did not know was that I had already started gathering my own evidence. I installed new security cameras along the tree line and dock, wide-angle lenses with infrared night vision. I set up discrete water testing kits at 3 points along the lake's edge. I even started interviewing neighbors casually, recording conversations with a small microphone clipped to my collar. Most of them had no idea what was going on, but a few offered tidbits that made my blood run cold. It was Mrs. Jensen, an older woman who walked her schnauzer along the lake every morning, who gave me the first real lead. "Saw a truck down by the water last week," she said, squinting against the sun. "Couple of men in hazmat suits. Thought it was strange. They were dumping something in from those big plastic barrels, like the kind you see at farms. She thought it had been official work, but when I asked the county if they had authorized any chemical treatments for the lake, they told me flatly that they had no record of any permit, no authorized activity, and that any chemical application to a natural body of water without their explicit oversight was illegal. That was the first crack. I dug deeper, tracing security footage from a neighbor's Ring doorbell that happened to catch the tail end of a white pickup leaving the lake area late one night. The truck had a logo on the door, half obscured, but after squinting at the pixelated letters and cross-referencing with local business licenses, I found it: Aqua Solutions Environmental Management. I called pretending to be a potential client, and learned that yes, they had done a treatment job for Willow Lake Estates recently, paid for by the HOA board under Aquatic Beautification Services. No, they would not discuss chemicals used without proper paperwork. No, they did not pull permits themselves. They assumed the client would handle that. My hands shook as I ended the call. The pieces fit together too neatly. The HOA, desperate to stop my fishing, had secretly hired contractors to dump chemicals into the lake without permits, hoping to kill off enough fish to make the water undesirable for recreation. They had not just killed the fish, they had poisoned the lake itself, and they had blamed me to cover it up. I knew it was serious, but I did not grasp how serious until I dug into the Willow Lake Estates community charter. The lake was not just decorative. It was a crucial part of the neighborhood's water supply system. A private treatment facility, funded by HOA fees, drew from the lake to supply irrigation to common areas, to the golf course, and to certain luxury homes fitted with dual plumbing systems. Poisoning the lake meant poisoning the very heart of the community's infrastructure. If the chemicals were as toxic as the smell and the dead fish suggested, it was not just about property values anymore. It was about public health. I printed everything: photos of the dead fish, water sample results showing elevated pesticide levels, screenshots from the Aqua Solutions website advertising herbicide and pesticide treatments for aquatic weed control, copies of the community charter highlighting the reliance on the lake for water services. I organized it all meticulously, creating a file so thick it barely fit in a 3-ring binder. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down, Flyers started circulating around the neighborhood with my face poorly photocopied in the center, warning residents about environmental negligence and reckless endangerment. She called a special HOA meeting, inviting all residents to discuss emergency measures to protect the community's natural resources. She even tried to initiate a petition to have me evicted, though legally they had no power to do so. I showed up to every meeting, calm and composed, sitting in the front row with my binder in my lap like a loaded weapon. I never spoke. I just smiled and waited. Because I knew the hammer was coming. It was not a question of if. It was only a question of when. And when it came, it would not just crack the facade of the HOA's authority. It would shatter it into dust. The lawsuit papers arrived on a Thursday, stuffed so arrogantly into my mailbox that the corner of the envelope stuck out like a white flag of war. I knew it was coming. Karen was nothing if not predictable. Still, holding the thick packet in my hands, I could not help the surge of anger that boiled up in my chest. Willow Lake Estates Homeowners Association. My name. The bold print screamed at me. The charges were as ridiculous as they were infuriating. Willful contamination of community resources, negligence resulting in environmental damage, and contribution to property value devaluation. They were seeking damages of $500,000, an astronomical sum that would have bankrupted me 10 times over. Karen had not just declared war. She had carpet-bombed the field and planted a flag in the ashes. I sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the pages, and let the anger settle into something colder, something sharper. Fine, I thought. If they wanted a war, I would give them one. But it was going to be on my terms. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, a real shark of a man named David Monroe who specialized in HOA disputes and environmental law. I laid out the entire situation, from the first fake violation notice to the dead fish washing up on my property. When I showed him the binder of evidence I had been collecting, his eyebrows climbed so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. "You have them by the throat," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "They just do not know it yet." We spent the next week building a counterattack. David filed a countersuit against the HOA, naming the board members personally, where applicable, for malicious property destruction, willful environmental contamination, gross negligence, and defamation of character. He also filed injunctions to preserve all HOA communications, minutes, emails, and contractor records, anticipating they would try to destroy evidence once they realized the depth of the hole they were standing in. But that was just the beginning. David also contacted the town health department, the County Environmental Protection Agency, and the State Department of Natural Resources. He sent copies of my water test results and photos of the dead fish to every relevant office, highlighting that the community's private water system was drawn from the now poisoned lake. If Karen had thought she was playing a neighborhood game, she was about to realize she had invited a cavalry charge onto her lawn. The first hearing was a circus. Karen showed up flanked by two equally smug lawyers in expensive suits, her mouth twisted into a smile so fake it looked painful. She wore a pearl necklace and carried a leather portfolio, the picture of respectable victimhood. I could almost hear her internal monologue, the brave defender of the community standing up to the rogue fishermen who had destroyed their precious lake. She radiated confidence as she strutted into the courtroom. That confidence lasted exactly 30 minutes. That was how long it took for David to start presenting our evidence. First came the security footage from my neighbor's Ring camera, showing the unmarked Aqua Solutions truck entering the private service road by the lake at 2 a.m, barrels clearly visible in the truck bed. Then came the records we had subpoenaed from Aqua Solutions themselves, which showed an invoice billed directly to the Willow Lake HOA for aquatic treatment services, without any permit numbers attached. Next, David unveiled the toxicology report from the independent lab we had hired, showing dangerously high levels of restricted pesticides in the water samples, pesticides known to cause fish kills and unsafe for human consumption. Finally, he read aloud excerpts from the community charter, highlighting the lake's role as a feeder for the irrigation system that supplied lawns, gardens, and in some cases, even household gray water systems throughout the community. Karen's face changed slowly over the course of that afternoon, from smug superiority to dawning horror to something close to panic. Her lawyers scrambled, trying to object, to delay, to dismiss. The judge, a stern woman with iron-gray hair and no patience for nonsense, shut them down at every turn. By the time we finished presenting the initial evidence, it was clear even to the most oblivious onlookers that this was no longer about a few dead fish. It was about criminal negligence. Word started leaking to the media almost immediately. A local reporter covering the courthouse beat picked up the story and ran a short segment that night on the evening news. Private lake contaminated. Residents at risk. Homeowners Association accused of negligence. They showed footage of the dead fish, of the hazmat suits, of Karen's white SUV, parked illegally across 2 spaces outside the courthouse. By morning, it had been picked up by 3 larger outlets. By the end of the week, it was a regional scandal. The town health department launched a full investigation, ordering immediate water testing of all community systems tied to the lake. Notices went out to residents warning them not to use irrigation water for edible plants and to avoid contact with standing water. Community events were canceled. The golf course, a point of pride and revenue for Willow Lake Estates, was shut down indefinitely due to contamination concerns. Property values, the very thing Karen and her cronies claimed to be protecting, plummeted almost overnight. For sale signs sprouted across the neighborhood like mushrooms after rain, but few buyers were willing to touch a contaminated development with a 10-foot pole. Inside the HOA, panic set in. Board meetings devolved into shouting matches. Karen tried to spin the narrative, claiming they had been misled by Aqua Solutions, that they had been acting in the best interests of the community. But leaked emails told a different story. Emails we had forced into discovery that showed Karen and the board discussing solutions to the fishing problem and proposing non-permit required treatments as a way to discourage unauthorized recreational activities. One email even joked about a few dead fish being worth a peaceful lake. When that email made the rounds on social media, Karen's reputation was torched beyond repair. It was not just Karen who suffered. Other board members resigned in disgrace, some facing their own legal consequences for approving the illegal treatment without informing residents. One particularly oily board member tried to claim he had objected privately, but David produced meeting minutes he had subpoenaed showing unanimous votes and cheerful consent. They were all going down together. For me, the hardest part was staying patient. Watching the slow collapse of the people who had tried to ruin my life was satisfying, yes, but I wanted justice, not just revenge. I wanted the record set straight. I wanted every lie they had told to be dragged into the sunlight and left there to rot. And most of all, I wanted to fish again in my own backyard without fear, without harassment, without poisoned water lapping at the shore. It was not over yet, but the tides had turned, and for the first time since Karen had marched onto my property waving that manila folder, I felt the wind at my back. The day the verdict came down, the air in the courtroom was so thick you could have sliced it with a butter knife. I sat at the plaintiff's table, back straight, heart pounding against my ribs like a war drum, while Karen Holloway perched across the aisle, pale and pinched, her pearl necklace trembling slightly against the hollow of her throat. The judge read the decision aloud in an even, clinical tone that made the words somehow hit harder. The Willow Lake Estates Homeowners Association was found liable for malicious destruction of private property, willful environmental negligence, public endangerment, and defamation. They were ordered to pay over $2.7 million in damages, fines, and restitution. The court also mandated the dissolution of the HOA itself, citing a pattern of gross misconduct and reckless disregard for resident welfare. Karen's lawyers immediately filed a motion to stay the dissolution, but the judge denied it without hesitation. The HOA was dead, and the people who killed it had nowhere left to hide. But the true death blow came next. As part of the environmental investigation, the county district attorney's office launched a parallel criminal probe. Within weeks, it was revealed that Karen had personally falsified documents related to the Aqua Solutions contract, forging board member signatures, and backdating permits that never actually existed. Worse, she had knowingly withheld toxicology results from the board and from residents once the first signs of contamination appeared. When the grand jury indictment landed, it hit like a thunderclap. Karen Holloway was charged with multiple counts of document falsification, reckless endangerment, conspiracy to commit environmental violations, and obstruction of justice. Her mugshot ran on the evening news, the morning papers, even national outlets that picked up the story as a cautionary tale about suburban corruption and HOA tyranny gone unchecked. Her trial was a grim parade of former allies lining up to testify against her, each revelation blackening her reputation further until there was nothing left but ashes. When the guilty verdict came, Karen barely reacted. She just stared straight ahead, her face carved from stone, as the judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison without the possibility of early parole. The courtroom murmured in shock, but I just sat there quietly, a small grim smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Justice had not just been served, it had been plated up with a side of poetic revenge. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Without the HOA to prop them up, property values across Willow Lake Estates collapsed almost overnight. Banks froze mortgages, buyers fled, and real estate agents practically begged anyone with a pulse to consider the now tainted neighborhood. Those once pristine lawns and manicured hedges became overgrown as maintenance budgets evaporated. The golf course remained closed, its greens browning into dust under the merciless summer sun. Houses that had once sold for $500,000 now languished on the market at fire sale prices, and still no one came. The HOA office building itself, a proud little stucco monstrosity at the entrance to the community, was padlocked by the sheriff's department and left to rot, a physical monument to arrogance and downfall. As for me, I stayed. I had fought too hard for this place to just walk away now, and slowly, without the iron fist of HOA control squeezing the life out of it, the neighborhood began to heal. The residents who remained banded together informally, neighbors helping neighbors, fixing what they could, ignoring what they could not. Nobody came around with clipboards or rulers anymore. Nobody issued violation notices because your trash cans were visible from the street. Nobody told me when or where or how I could fish. The lake took longer to recover, but it did. Specialists from the county, funded by part of the damages paid by the now defunct HOA, worked tirelessly to detoxify the water, reintroduce native plants, and restock fish populations. Every day, I watched the water regain its sparkle, the life seep back into the reeds, the dragonflies dance once more across the shallows. It was not instant, it was not easy, but it was real. I will never forget the day the new sign went up. It was a simple wooden post, hand-painted by one of the older residents whose arthritis made every brushstroke a labor of love. "Welcome to Willow Lake Estates," it said, and below it, in bold, cheerful letters, "No, oh." I helped dig the post hole myself, sweat dripping from my forehead, hands blistered and raw. When we raised that sign and hammered it into place, the small crowd that had gathered broke into spontaneous applause. It was not just a sign, it was a symbol. A promise that we had reclaimed our home from the petty tyrants who had nearly destroyed it. That evening, I sat on my dock with a cold beer in one hand and a fishing rod in the other. The sky blazed orange and purple as the sun sank behind the trees. The water lapped gently at the posts, clear and alive once again. My line drifted lazily across the surface, and somewhere below, a fish stirred. I smiled, feeling more at peace than I had in years. I sipped my beer, savoring the crisp bitterness, and watched as the first stars began to prick holes in the darkening sky. The world kept turning. The seasons kept changing. But here, in this small corner of it, we had carved out something rare and precious. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from slogans or flags or bumper stickers, but the quiet kind, the stubborn kind, the kind that is fought for inch by inch and defended every single day. And if any future busybody ever thought about trying to bring back an HOA, I would be right here waiting, fishing rod in hand, coffee steaming beside me, ready to remind them exactly what happened the last time someone underestimated the people of Willow Lake Estates. Because some battles are worth fighting, some victories are worth savoring, and some lakes, some little patches of stubborn earth and stubborn people, are worth defending with everything you have. Always have been, always will be.